Beneath the Holy Cross Monastery, there is a chamber no one enters, a vault carved from black stone, where every candle snuffs itself out. The priest sealed it a century ago, after the last man to descend was found, kneeling, whispering, to something that wasn't there. The church calls it superstition, but the walls still hum after midnight. The stones of Holy Cross Monastery were blackened by time on cold mornings. Mist clung to its cloisters like a living thing, seeping through cracks and pooling in the narrow walkways. Even now, standing in silence, the walls seemed to hold the echo of voices that had long gone still. In 1892, the monks locked the lowest passage. They claimed it was collapsing. They told the surrounding village that the foundations were unsound, that no one should ever descend. Those stairs again, and they bricked the archway shut layer after layer of mortar, until the staircase was nothing more than a memory behind the stones. But their journals tell a different story. Pages yellowed by candle smoke describe the nights before the chamber was sealed, nights when the shadows beneath the chapel moved, though there was no light to cast them, nights when the Gregorian chants that had risen faithfully for years would stop mid-note, mid-word, as though something had silenced every breath in unison. The brothers wrote carefully, as if aware that their own words might be used against them. They never called it evil, ever called it cursed, only wrong. Father Matthias, the monastery's prior, noted the first shift in late November. He described it simply: the air grows heavy below the altar. It tastes of metal, and no sound carries in the stair. At first, the monks dismissed it as fatigue. The winter was harsh that year. Food was scarce, and the wind clawed through the valley like a blade. Men imagined things, they said, when their bellies were empty and their bodies tired. But then Brother Keene descended to fetch a forgotten relic chest. He didn't return for 2 hours. When he finally emerged, he carried nothing, and he wouldn't speak, not that day, not the next. His eyes, normally bright, seemed fixed on something behind the world, somewhere no one else could see. He was moved to the infirmary, where the journals say he whispered the same phrase again and again. Not a prayer, not a song, just 3 words. It followed me. The prior ordered another descent. This time, 3 men went, carrying lanterns and a rope tied to the iron banister. Their instructions were clear: retrieve the relics, note any damages, and return before the night bell. They returned, but each lantern had gone dark before they reached the 3rd landing. The rope, still taut, had gone slack halfway down the stair, as if something heavy had rested on it, pulling without weight. They reported no collapse, no cracks, no water seepage, only silence, so deep and so sudden that they could not hear even the echo of their own steps. And then, a voice not loud, not near, just there, reciting a prayer none of them recognized, in a language that was not Latin, nor any tongue they had heard in their studies. They climbed quickly, 2 at a time, dropping the rope as they went. Their journals do not record what. The voice said only that it spoke until the first foot left the bottom stair, and then stopped. The following evening, Father Matthias made his decision. He ordered the chamber sealed. He told the monks, and later the villagers, that the lower level had been condemned, that the beams were shifting, and the floor could give way at any moment. He cited safety. He cited God's will. But his final entry in the journal betrays him. It reads, "Shadows move without us, voices pray without breath, and our chants will not finish. The stones below will not be blessed. We seal them now, before they learn our names." By winter's end, the archway was bricked over. The monastery resumed its routine. Chants rose again in the chapel. Steady and whole visitors forgot the sublevel existed, and the monks never spoke of it. Not even in passing yet. The journals remained folded in the library, tucked between scripture and songbooks, as if waiting to be found by someone who had read what the brothers could not say aloud on the last page of Matthias's record. Dated the morning after the final sealing, there is a single note, no salutation, no signature, just one sentence, written in a hand so faint it nearly vanishes in the parchment. The shadows have learned the stairs, and beneath that, a small smear of soot, as if from a candle wick, snuffed out before its time. The chapel of Holy Cross sat quiet beneath the winter fog. Its stone walls, weathered and slick from years of rain, looked like they had grown from the earth itself. The belfry towered above the courtyard, its bronze bell unmoving, green with corrosion. For decades, the sound of its toll had marked the hours, but by 1976, no hand had pulled the rope in years. The bell was silent, or it was supposed to be on the first Sunday of February. The sound returned, not at dawn, not at any hour the monks kept it, began at night, when the chapel was empty, and every window was black. Witnesses said it didn't sound like a bell at first. Not exactly. The notes were soft, distant, as though coming from far below the ground. The tone was wrong. Each peal stretched too long, warbling, as if muffled by earth and stone, and beneath it, some swore they heard something else, a rhythm like breath, breaking into sobs. But something wasn't right. The local caretaker, a retired groundsman named Joseph Hawley, was the first to report it. He had walked the perimeter late that night, lantern in hand, when he felt it before he heard it. The soil at the base of the chapel steps trembled faintly, as though a heavy cart had rolled by, though the nearest road was miles away. Then, the sound one long, low ring, as if struck by a padded hammer, followed by another, then another 12 in total. But when Hawley turned his lantern upward, the belfry stood silent. Its bell hung still, unmoved by any rope or windy, swore the sound wasn't coming from above. It was coming from beneath his feet. The next morning, word spread to the nearby village. Most dismissed it as the wind catching some old mechanism, but by the end of the week, more had heard it, not just the bells. The weeping, a soft, broken sound buried in the chime, like someone crying behind a wall. It began every night just after midnight and stopped, always at the 13th toll by mid-February. The diocese sent 2 men to investigate. One was an archivist, the other a structural inspector with no ties to the church. They worked by day, lowering instruments into the earth from the chapel floor, noting temperature, air pressure, and soil density. Nothing unusual, no air pockets, no shifting foundation. But when the sun went down, the walls began to tremble, slow at first, like a distant train, then a steady pulse, in time with the low tolling that rose through the floorboards. The inspector, a man named Alan Keene, recorded the vibrations on a handheld device. In his notes, he described a pattern. Each pulse lasted 3 seconds. Each was followed by 2 faint taps, like knuckles brushing stone, and with every pulse, the sound of air moving through the walls. Though the chapel had no open vents on the 3rd night, Keene lit a match to check the airflow. He wrote later that the flame burned steady, no draft, no pressure shift. But the moment the flame touched the air, the tolling stopped. The walls went still. The chapel returned to silence. That's when he heard it, not the bells, not the weeping, but a single exhale, long, drawn out, so close it seemed to brush the back of his neck. When he spun, the archivist was still 20 feet away, packing the instruments into their case. Keene didn't speak, didn't finish his notes that night. He left his journal open, the ink drying mid-word. It knows when there's light. The diocese closed the investigation a week later. Their official report blamed structural resonance, a natural echo caused by wind moving through the ancient stone. They denied the bells had rung. They denied the walls had vibrated. But locals knew what they heard, and by spring, the monastery's services were sparsely attended. People didn't want to stand above something they couldn't name. For years afterward, villagers said the sound continued, not every night, not at the same hour, but often enough that no one walked near the chapel after dark. Even Hall, who had tended the grounds his entire life, stopped his rounds before sunset. He claimed the soil around the chapel steps still trembled sometimes, like something shifting in the dirt, not rising, just moving, waiting. He died in his sleep 3 years later, never setting foot near the chapel again. And yet, His daughter later said he kept a box. Beneath his bed, inside, were scraps of paper, dozens of them, each marked with the same thing. A set of tally marks, always 12, and beneath them, written in a hand that shook with age, 3 faint words. It's not bells. The chapel stands empty now, its doors locked, its windows shuttered, but the villagers still speak of the sound. How on certain nights, when the fog is heavy, the ground beneath the chapel seems to hum. How, if you press your ear to the cold stone wall, you can still hear a low, trembling note, followed by another and another, until the 13th fades. And beneath it, so faint it can barely be heard, a soft, broken sound like someone crying. Far below, the air beneath Holy Cross was always colder. Even in summer, when the fields above baked under a pale sun, the stone steps that led into the sublevel held the chill of deep earth. Every footfall sent a soft, hollow echo up the walls. Like the stair itself was breathing. Father Laird carried 12 candles, each one wrapped in white linen, blessed that morning at the altar, their wicks dipped in holy oil. He was not a fearful man, but his instructions had been clear. Bring no lantern, no open flame unblessed, only consecrated light, and only 12. The monastery had grown uneasy after the return of the bells. The brothers whispered of the sealed chamber. Some claimed to hear vibrations beneath the floorboards again. Others swore they had seen frost blooming along the stone arch near the old stair. Though the air above was warm, it was decided that the chamber must be blessed, once and for all, by a single priest. Father Laird volunteered. He descended alone. The first candle held high. Its flame quivered but held, casting long, trembling shadows. Along the narrow stair, the steps wound deep, 27 in total, before spilling into the black mouth of the lower hall. The archway still bore soot from the last candles, carried down decades earlier, though the passage had been swept since he set the first candle on the lowest step, a marker for his return, and continued forward. The chamber stretched wider than he expected. Low vaulted ceilings, blackened stone walls slick with condensation. In the center, a circle of old wooden pews, left as they were the night the place was sealed. Beyond them, the darkness seemed to thicken, as if the corners of the room swallowed the light. He set the remaining 11 candles one by one, placing them at measured intervals around the circle, each wick caught slowly, the flames burning steady, their glow pushing back the shadows just enough to reveal the whole of the chamber. For the first time in years, the room was lit, but something wasn't right. The sound? There was no sound, no drip of water from the stone above, no echo of his own breath, only a heavy, waiting stillness, as though the chamber itself were holding something back. He opened his book, The Rite of Purification. His voice was steady as he began the prayer, each Latin syllable carefully enunciated, the words rising into the stagnant air. And that's when the first candle went out. A faint hiss, like breath against glass. The flame didn't flicker or fade, it simply died, leaving a small curl of smoke twisting toward the ceiling. He hesitated, but continued the prayer. The second candle followed, then the third, each extinguished not in order, but at random, as if something moved unseen between them. By the 8th verse, the chamber was nearly dark. Only 4 candles remained. Their glow, weak against the black. He tried to raise his voice, to carry the words with greater strength, but the sound fell flat, absorbed by the cold air around him. It was then he realized the words were still echoing, not as they should, not from the walls. The echo repeated every phrase he spoke, one beat after him, perfectly, but the voice was not his. It was lower, calm, measured, and it did not match his cadence. Each word came slower, stretched, like someone savoring every syllable. He froze, his hand gripping the small silver cross at his collar. The chamber smelled suddenly of extinguished wicks, a sour, burnt scent that clung to the back of his throat. The 11th candle sputtered, hissed, and went black. Only one remained set on the altar, at the far end of the circle, its flame barely holding. The voice continued, though he had stopped speaking, repeating the final line of the prayer, again and again, as if urging him to finish Hythe. Turned toward the stair. The marker candle on the lowest step was gone. No smoke, no trace it had ever been lit. The entrance stood swallowed in shadow. The way back now, only a black shape in the distance. The last candle flickered. The voice grew closer. He clutched the book to his chest and began to walk. Slow, careful steps. The prayer now only a whisper on his lips behind him. The final flame went out. The sound that followed was not a voice, not a whisper, not the toll of bells. It was the sound of air rushing inward, like the entire chamber exhaled at once, and everything, every shadow, every echo, every trace of light was pulled into it when he reached the first step. The stair felt warm beneath his feet, as if the stone itself had a pulse. He did not look back, did not retrieve the candles, did not finish the prayer later. In his written report, Father Laird wrote only one line beneath the account of the extinguished lights. It knows the words now. He never returned to the chamber, and no one asked him to. The courtyard was silent when Brother Alban left his cell. The fog had crept low across the flagstones, pale and unmoving, swallowing the outline of the chapel doors beyond the walls. The forest whispered softly in the wind, but inside the monastery, every corridor was still. He was young, barely 20, the newest among the brothers, still learning the rhythms of their prayers, still unsure when to speak and when to remain quiet when Father Laird failed to return from the lower chamber. It was Alban they sent to fetch him. The other monks stayed behind. Some claimed their knees ached. Others busied themselves with tasks that could wait until morning. But the truth, spoken only in glances, was clear. None of them wanted to descend. Those stairs Alban carried no candles, no lantern, only a small crucifix on a leather cord and a single match. Tucked into the hem of his robe, he had been told to walk straight, to speak no words, and to bring Father Laird back to the upper floor if he was not there. He was not to linger. The stair smelled of soot. The faint, sour tongue of burned wicks clung to the air, though no smoke remained. Each step groaned softly beneath his weight, as though the stones themselves shifted with his descent. The sound of the monastery above faded quickly, replaced by a thick, oppressive quiet. His breath sounded too loud. His heart beat louder still at the base of the stair. The air grew colder, not the cold of winter, but something heavier, like the air was being pulled toward the floor. He paused, one hand against the wall, the other tightening around the cord of his crucifix on. That's when he heard a faint movement, not a voice, not even a clear sound, just the subtle scrape of something across stone. It came from the far side of the chamber, near where the last of Father Laird's candles had been left, but there was no light, only the suggestion of shapes in the dark, too far to see clearly. He called out once, his voice soft, careful not to let it echo. No reply, only the same faint scrape, now closer, followed by a sound like fingertips brushing the stone floor. He took one step forward, then another. His shoes touched something soft, the linen of a burned candle wick, still warm to the touch, though there was no flame. The heat startled him. It felt alive. He drew his hand back quickly, whispering a prayer beneath his breath. The chamber was silent again, and then it wasn't a hand closed over his wrist, not a strong grip, not even forceful, just the unmistakable weight of fingers, colder than the air, pressing lightly against his skin. He pulled back instinctively, stumbling, his shoes scraping against the stone. His crucifix clattered to the floor. When he reached for it, another hand touched the back of his own, but there was no one there. The pressure was real, the sensation, undeniable. Fingers, palms, the faint drag of nails, some held for only a moment. Before letting go, others lingered, brushing against his robes, tracing the line of his forearm. He scrambled backward, his breathing sharp, his hands pressed flat to the floor to steady himself. And that's when the pain began. His palms burned a deep, searing heat, as though the stone beneath them had turned to iron pulled from a forge. He cried out, the sound swallowed instantly by the thick air. When he lifted his hands, the skin along his palms was red, raw, as though he had pressed them to a flame. His fingernails were split at the edges, small rivulets of blood tracing down his fingertips. Through the darkness, something shifted, a whisper, not words, but a soft exhale that felt close enough to touch. He staggered to his feet, clutching his burned hands to his chest, his breath shaking with every step. He didn't call for Father Laird. Again, didn't look for the missing candles. Didn't even retrieve the crucifix he had dropped. He ran. The climb up the stair felt endless, each step heavier than the last, as though the air below was pulling at him, tugging him back into the dark. He didn't stop until his shoulder struck the chapel door, bursting into the faint glow of the sanctuary lamps. The other brothers found him kneeling in the aisle, shaking, his hands blistered and red, his nails cracked, his robe torn at the knees. He would not speak for hours, and when he finally did, his words were slow, halting, as if each one carried weight. There were more hands, he whispered, more than mine, holding me, pulling, but they weren't warm. He slept for 3 days, his palms wrapped in linen, his fever breaking only when the blisters began to fade. He never returned to the chamber, never descended the stair again. But in the weeks that followed, the other brothers began to notice something every night. While Albin slept, his fingers would twitch slowly, methodically, as though counting, one hand at a time. Something no one else could see. Chamber had been sealed for nearly a century. The air inside carried a damp weight, a stillness that clung to skin and clothing, as though it had been waiting untouched for something to disturb it. Dust lay thick on the floor, layered in a way that made every footprint sharp, unnatural in the undisturbed gloom. The renovation crew descended in silence. 4 men, none of them part of the monastery, each carrying electric lamps that flickered weakly against the black stone. Their boots echoed softly on the stairwell, every sound amplified by the narrow corridor. The monastery had commissioned repairs after reports of shifting support beams. The task was supposed to be simple: assess the walls, reinforce the ceiling, and leave. But something wasn't right. The walls were intact. No cracks, no loose stone, no evidence of the earth pressing inward. Instead, there were carvings, not shallow scratches, but deep spiraled grooves that curled inward in patterns no one could identify. The marks covered nearly every surface. Some ran straight into corners, others looped in slow, deliberate spirals, always turning in the same direction, as if meant to lead the eye somewhere. One of the men, a surveyor named Hall, traced a finger along the edge of a spiral. The stone felt warmer than the air, faintly slick, as if the groove had been carved not centuries ago, but hours before he wiped his hand on his trousers. The warmth lingered. He didn't mention it to the others. The foreman, Kane, knelt near the largest spiral, his lamp beam following the line as it twisted down toward the floor. He muttered that it wasn't Latin, wasn't Greek, wasn't any script he recognized. The lines weren't letters, they were shapes, suggestive of meaning, but too abstract to read. And that's when he heard Ida whisper, soft, familiar at first. He thought it was Hall speaking, or one of the others calling his name from across the chamber. But the words were too faint, too deliberate. Not conversation, prayer, a prayer in his own voice. He stood quickly, turning to the others. They hadn't spoken. They were still working, marking the spirals on their clipboards. Their backs turned to him. Kane swallowed and returned to his work, tracing another line with his pencil. The whisper began again, slower this time. Each syllable clear. It was a prayer he knew, one he hadn't said in years. The words rising softly, steady, as though being read aloud by him. Somewhere he couldn't see Hall heard it next. Not Kane's voice, his own reciting a confession he'd spoken only once, decades earlier, into the ear of a priest long dead. Every pause, every hesitation, repeated back to him, as if the stone had kept it. The third man, Royce, dropped his lamp. It hit the floor, the bulb shattering with a pop that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. He claimed later that as his hand brushed one of the smaller spirals, he heard not a prayer, but his own breath, whispering words. He swore he had never spoken foreign words drawn out, each one curling like the spirals themselves. The darkness closed in quickly. After the light failed, the remaining lamps flickered. Their glow dulled as though the air had grown. Thicker, heavier, the grooves along the walls seemed to deepen in the low light, their spirals twisting. Pulling at the edge of vision, Kane ordered the men out. No measurements, no sketches. They left their tools on the floor, their boots echoing too loud against the stair as they climbed when they reached the surface. The brothers waiting at the top said none of them spoke for several minutes. They stood in the cold morning air, eyes unfocused, hands trembling slightly. Though none admitted fear, Hall finally broke the silence, saying only, "The walls know what we've said." Later, the foreman's clipboard was found near the chamber entrance. Every page had been filled, not with notes or sketches, but with long, spiraling lines, drawn over and over until the pencil had torn through the paper. Renovation was halted, the chamber sealed again, and none of the men returned to the site. But in the weeks that followed, each one reported the same thing at night. As they tried to sleep, they would hear a whisper just beyond the edge of waking a prayer, sometimes in their voice, sometimes in the voices of others they knew. Always quiet, always curling back on itself. Like the spirals on the stone, none of them could remember the words upon waking, only the rhythm slow measured, unbroken, and each one, without knowing the others had done the same, began to leave marks in the margins of whatever paper they could find. Circles, lines, always turning in the same direction, always leading inward as though the spiral had followed them home. The hill around Holy Cross was covered in fog, thick enough to swallow sound. The moonlight filtered through in pale ribbons. Broken by the skeletal trees that lined the monastery grounds beyond the stone gate, the chapel stood silent, its windows black, its bell tower a dark silhouette against the night. It was just past midnight when the first light appeared, not bright, not warm, a faint, wavering glow low to the ground, as though from a candle cupped in a gloved hand. Then another, and another. A line of figures emerged from the fog, robed, hooded, their movements deliberate, slow, each step measured as they crossed the courtyard. The witnesses counted 13 in total. Each carried a candle, but none of the flames were lit at first. The onlookers thought it was some ritual, a late-night procession arranged by the remaining brothers, a prayer, a vigil, something to mark the night. But there were no chants, no sound of breath, not even the soft shuffle of their feet against the stones, only the faint hum of the wind winding through the monastery walls. But something wasn't right. The monastery had been empty for years. The last of the brothers had left in 1991. After the diocese closed the building to all services, the crypt had been locked, its heavy iron door sealed with a chain and padlock. The key held miles away. There should have been no one there. The procession reached the crypt entrance. One by one, each figure stopped before the locked gate. No one reached for the chain. No one tried the lock. They simply stood still, silent, their heads tilted slightly upward, as though listening for something beyond the walls. A witness, a farmer named Gerald Pike, later told investigators that he felt a vibration through the ground where he stood. Not a tremor, not wind, a steady rhythm, faint, pulsing up through the soles of his boots, like a heartbeat buried deep below. And that's when he heard it, not words, not a chant, a single, hollow sound, like the faint toll of a bell struck somewhere beneath the earth. The figures moved, then their hoods lowering, their heads bowing in unison, as the sound echoed through the night air. One by one, they passed through the crypt door, not opening it, not breaking the chain, not disturbing the lock. They simply crossed the threshold, each vanishing into the darkness beyond, as though the door had never been there at all. A final figure lingered. For a moment, its candle raised slightly. Though the wick was as dark as the others, its hood turned, facing the courtyard where Pike and the others stood hidden. No face looked back, only a smooth, pale surface where features should have been, faintly reflective in the moonlight. It turned away and stepped through the gate. A vibration in the ground stopped. The tolling sound faded. The crypt door remained locked, the chain unbroken. the padlock. Untouched at dawn, Pike returned with 2 others. They searched the grounds, the courtyard, and the slope beyond the crypt. No footprints in the fog-damp soil, no wax drippings from candles, no sign anyone had been there. The only disturbance was near the base of the crypt steps. 13 small indentations, perfectly round, pressed shallow into the stone as though something heavy had rested there. The diocese dismissed the report, citing exhaustion, drink, or shared suggestion as explanations for what Pike and the others claimed, but each of them described the same thing, word for word, without variation. The silent figures, the unlit candles, the toll beneath the earth, and the face, or the absence of one, that turned toward them in the fog weeks later. Pike stopped speaking about that night altogether. Neighbors said he became restless after dark, pacing the edge of his fields, staring toward the hill where Holy Cross stood. On more than one occasion, his wife woke to find him standing at the window motionless, his breath fogging the glass as he whispered numbers under his breath. Always the same number 13, spoken softly, again and again. Until morning broke, he never returned to the hill. But in his final weeks, before his sudden death the following winter, he was seen carrying a candle whenever he walked the fields at night. The wick was never lit, not once, when he was buried. The candle was found clutched in his hand, its surface marked by 13 faint indentations, as though pressed by. Fingertips? No one could say when the marks had appeared. No one wanted to the crypt of Holy Cross. Remains locked the chain. Untouched, hangs heavy over the gate, but the locals swear that on nights when the fog rolls low over the hill, a vibration returns faint steady, and if you stand still and wait, you can feel it rising through the stone, a heartbeat, buried far below, counting slowly 13 beats. Every time the office was quiet, when the letters were opened, yellowed envelopes, wax seals cracked with age, their ink faded, their edges brittle, as though they had been carried too far and kept too long in the dark. Each bore the insignia of the archdiocese. Each was marked with the same word, written in a practiced hand across the top corner sealed. The public had been told another story. The chamber beneath Holy Cross, they said, was a fabrication, a monastic embellishment, born of superstition and repeated through whispers until it became a legend. The bells that rang beneath the floor, the procession seen at midnight, witnesses misled by fog, by memory, by fear. The official statement, released in the winter of 1995, dismissed it all, but something wasn't right among the papers. Tucked beneath layers of correspondence were older letters, not from this continent, not from this century. They spoke of other chambers, sealed chambers across France, Poland, Spain, each one beneath an abbey or cathedral now abandoned, its foundation left to rot while the earth swallowed. Its walls each described the same ritual, a locking of the lower doors, the blessing of a threshold, the leaving of light, not lit, not burning, at every corner of the crypt, and above all, the order never to open them again. Some letters bore the names of men who vanished before they could deliver their reports. Others ended abruptly, mid-sentence, their final lines blotched by water stains or what looked like soot. One, written in N. 1714, carried a note along its margin in hurried Latin. It does not forget the words we give it when the leaks emerged. No one could confirm where they had come from. Some claimed a former archivist, aged and bitter, had carried them out of the Vatican's locked vaults. Others said they had been left intentionally, as a warning, by someone still within the hierarchy. Whoever had released them never stepped forward, and those who received them never held them for long. The pages vanished as quickly as they appeared, pulled back into the quiet channels that had first hidden them, and that's when he heard a retired bishop, unnamed in the records, later admitted in a private interview that the night the Holy Cross chamber was first declared non-existent, he woke to the faint toll of a bell inside his rectory. Not a loud sound, not even a true chime, just a hollow vibration, like a distant knell pressed against the bones of his skull. When he sat up in bed, it stopped, but the silence after felt heavier than the sound itself. He was not the only one. Other clergy, scattered across Europe and North America, reported strange disturbances in the nights after the chamber was debunked. Unlit candles, found at their doorsteps, wax melted into spirals across the floors of sacristies, a faint, rhythmic pulse rising through the wooden pews during midnight prayer. None of it was ever written into official record. Not a single incident acknowledged. The archdiocese doubled down on its decree. The chamber, they said, was never a danger, because it was never real. But the letters told a different story. One, dated 1892, the year Holy Cross first sealed its sublevel, contained a single instruction, stamped with the seal of Rome: do not permit light to burn where the words have settled. It will hear another. From 1765, warned that a chamber beneath Montreal Abbey responds only when spoken to, and ordered it to be locked before. Another voice has learned the pattern was clear. The chambers weren't abandoned by accident. They were abandoned because something in them remained aware, listening, waiting for a sound it could keep. The last of the leaked letters, dated only a few years before the Holy Cross incident, bore no greeting, no closing, no name, just a line scrawled in dark ink, uneven, as if written in haste. We have sealed it, but it will find the others. The ground remembers the letter ended there. No signature, no location, no hint of who had written it or why it had been filed among official correspondence. And yet, weeks after the leaks became public, those who would read them began to notice something subtle, not loud, not sudden, just the faint echo of a rhythm, felt rather than heard. When they stood on stone floors late at night, a pulse rising through the soles of their shoes, slow and deliberate, as if something below was counting. Some say it stops when you speak aloud. Others claim it grows stronger. The archdiocese has not addressed the leaks. The chamber remains locked. The letters are gone. But every so often, a copy of that final line appears on the back of an envelope, on a folded page left in a church pew, in a stranger's handwriting, pressed into the margins of a hymnal. The ground remembers. No one knows where those copies come from. No one keeps them for long, because those who hold them swear they can feel the rhythm in the paper itself, faint, steady counting, and when they set it down, the pulse lingers in their hands. The first frame of their footage shows nothing unusual, just the courtyard of Holy Cross, the stones wet from a late autumn rain, fog moving in slow sheets across the hillside, thinning just enough to reveal the outline of the chapel and its empty bell tower, a soft hum of wind, the faint rustle of leaves. No voices, no movement, only the sound of the camera. Adjusting as they stepped closer, the crew arrived in the early evening. 4 people, 2 men. 2 women hired to capture a single night inside the monastery for a low-budget documentary on abandoned religious sites. They had been granted rare access by the property's caretaker, though he refused to accompany them beyond the threshold of the main hall. His warning was simple: stay out of the lower level after midnight, and leave if the air feels heavy. Footage shows them laughing. At first the sound is small, forced, but it cuts through the empty halls. Their flashlights scan along cracked plaster walls, across the rotting frames of wooden pews, over the tarnished brass handles of long-forgotten doors. One of the women, identified only as Mara, remarks on how still the building feels, like it's waiting. She says no one responds. They descend to the lower stairwell 30 minutes in. The last timestamp before the descent shows 11:48 p.m. The crew's chatter is quieter now. Their camera captures the narrow corridor, stone walls lined with moisture, narrowing as it slopes downward. The sound of their steps is sharper here, echoing off the low ceiling. But something wasn't right. The air grows heavier on the recording. Not a visible change, but audible. The sound of their breathing deepens. Each inhale feels strained, each exhale deliberate, as though the space is pulling the air from their lungs. One of the men, Daniel, comments on it softly. Feels like we're walking underwater. They set up near the chamber's center, a single table, a few scattered candles from prior visitors, and their tripod fixed toward the spiral-marked walls. The footage shows them lighting one candle. The flame is small, steady. The rest of the chamber remains dark, their flashlights switched off to conserve batteries. The quiet stretches, only the sound of their equipment shifting as they prepare for a narration. Then, a sound low, indistinct, like a single breath drawn too close to the microphone. The camera tilts slightly, as though one of them noticed it, but no one speaks. The breath comes again, longer this time, rising into a faint wordless hum before, fading back into silence, and that's when he heard it. Daniel turns his head. On the audio, his voice is barely audible as he says, "Did you hear that?" The others shake their heads, but Mara freezes, her gaze fixed on the candle's flame. It flickers once, sharply, though there is no draft, no movement. She whispers something under her breath, a short prayer, caught faintly on the mic. Her lips tremble. The others notice only when the flame leans again, bending low as though drawn toward the floor. The camera captures a faint vibration in the table, barely perceptible, but present, a rhythmic pulse, each beat spaced evenly apart, growing, subtly stronger. The sound of their breathing changes again, each inhale coming faster, as though their bodies are trying to match the rhythm beneath them. 36 minutes in, Daniel suggests they leave. His tone is steady, but his hands, visible near the frame, are shaking. The others do not argue. The footage shifts as they begin gathering their gear. The camera, still on its tripod, faces the spiral wall. The pulse beneath the floor grows louder, just enough to rattle the microphone. And then, the final frame, the candle tips, not knocked, not blown, it simply falls. As though something had pulled the air from beneath it, the flame gutters out instantly. As it strikes the stone, a whisper follows. Close, so close it distorts the mic. 2 words, soft and deliberate, spoken in a voice no one on the crew can be identified. As matching not yet, the footage ends there. The timestamp reads 12:07 a.m. No abrupt cut, no static, no sign of interference, just silence. When the caretaker returned the next morning, he found the camera at the base of the stairwell. Its tripod was missing, its battery nearly drained, though it had been fully charged the day before. Of the 4 crew members, there was no sign, no footprints in the damp soil near the crypt, no gear, not even the spent wax from the fallen candle. The only trace, aside from the camera, was a faint scent in the stairwell. Not smoke, not dust, something sweeter, like the lingering note of melted wax after a vigil has ended, clung to the walls, faint, disappearing as he ascended toward the surface. The footage was turned over to local authorities, then quietly archived. The documentary was never completed. The crew was listed as missing, presumed dead. The camera itself has changed hands many times since. Each person who has owned it claims the same thing. When the room is silent and the lights are low, you can feel a vibration through the lens, faint, measured, a rhythm that does not match your own pulse. And if you let it sit long enough and keep the room still, you will hear a breath rise through the mic, drawn slow, close, followed by the same 2 words, always in a voice you don't recognize. Not yet. Snow rarely lingers long on the hill where Holy Cross stands. Even in the deepest cold of January, the drifts thin and scatter across the courtyard, as though something beneath the ground refuses to let the frost settle in the morning. When the air is still, the earth lies bare in broad, irregular patches. But when the night returns, patterns begin to form. They are not footprints, not tracks from deer, or from the stray dogs that haunt the outskirts of town. The patterns curve and fan outward across the soil, faint ridges of frost spreading in long, symmetrical lines. Some stretch as far as 10 feet, tapering at their ends. Others cross over one another, arching into shapes the locals describe only as ribs. In the gray morning light, they glint sharp and skeletal, vanishing as the sun climbs. At first, people thought it was just the wind, cold air sweeping down the slope, pushing the frost into strange shapes. But those who watch the patterns form say there is no wind when they appear. The trees along the edges of the courtyard remain still. The fog that drifts in from the valley hangs motionless, like breath caught between exhale and inhale, and yet the soil stirs, not visibly, not in a way you can point to, but enough to feel through the soles of your boots. A slow rise, then a subtle fall, as though the earth itself is drawing air, but something wasn't right. The first to notice it were the hunters who crossed the hill at dusk. Their dogs, usually eager to nose through every corner of the grounds, froze at the courtyard's edge, hackles raised, ears low. Some refused to take another step, whining softly before bolting back toward the road. Others lay flat against the ground, their bodies rigid, refusing to move forward until they were dragged away. None of them barked. Not once one hunter, a man named Lewis, swore he heard something beneath the soil as his hound froze in place. Not the shifting of ice, not water running below. Voices soft layered a low murmuring that rose only when the wind stopped. It came in pulses, spaced apart as though timed with each subtle swell of the ground beneath his boots. He stood there for nearly a minute, straining to hear, before his dog lunged free and fled. Lewis followed without looking back, and that's when he heard it. Not words, not even a full sound, just a long, shallow inhale, the kind a person makes when they're just waking, deep and slow, filling their lungs for the first time. It came from below. Directly beneath him, the murmuring stopped, the ground stilled, and then, as he stepped backward, the frost at his feet cracked in a thin, deliberate line, as though something had traced the shape of his boots from underneath. He didn't return to the hill, but others did. Curiosity spread. Teenagers, drifters, even a few from the nearby parish who wanted proof. Each one described the same feeling when they stood on the frozen soil. The quiet seemed wrong, too deep, as if the trees and the sky themselves had gone silent, and then the pulse beneath their feet, not constant, measured, slow, like the earth was breathing through the ribs, the frost marked across its surface. Some claimed they heard the murmurs too, voices layered so faintly they could not make out a single word. Others heard only the inhale, always from below, always followed by a stillness so complete it made their own breathing sound intrusive. Unnatural in the open air. No one stays long, even those who arrive defiant, laughing as they press their boots into the frost. Leave quickly once the silence deepens. The sound, whatever it is, seems to grow closer. The longer one stands still, not louder, just nearer, like a whisper pressed closer to the ear. With each rise and fall of the ground, the frost patterns vanish with the morning sun. The soil looks untouched, bare and ordinary beneath the monastery ruins, but those who stood on it at night say they carry something back with them. Not fear, not a sound they can remember, a rhythm, a faint cadence in their own breath, as though their lungs have been forced to match what lies beneath the hill. Slow, measured, not their own. And in the days after, some claim they can feel it even when they lie awake at night, miles from Holy Cross, a weight beneath the floorboards, a subtle lift, then fall, as though the ground beneath their homes is following the same cycle, breathing with them or making them breathe with it. No one knows what happens if you stay long enough to match it completely. No one has tried, but the locals say that on the coldest nights, when the wind has died and the fog presses close to the soil, the frost forms more than ribs. It arcs into shapes like a spine, curling out from the center of the courtyard, its lines pointing outward, always toward the living. And when the ground exhales, they swear the murmurs rise louder than before. Not quite sound, just the sense that something below the hill is not asleep, not buried, not silent only, waiting for the breath to finish. The monastery does not look alive anymore. Its stone walls are mottled with black lichen. The roof, collapsed in places, leaves the upper hallways open to the gray sky. Wind moves through the shattered windows in low, uneven tones, a sound closer to a breath than a whistle. Even the birds, so often seen circling ruins like this, avoid it. Only the fog climbs its walls. Only the cold lingers. Urban explorers arrive in groups, but rarely more than once. The path up the hill is slow, uneven, the old steps cracked and sunken into the earth at night. The fog hides the ruins until you're nearly At their doors, the bulk of the chapel rising suddenly from the dark like a shape held just beyond the edge of sight. Those who make the climb speak in whispers without meaning to, as if the walls themselves are holding something back that shouldn't be disturbed. Most of them say the same thing about the air inside. It doesn't move, not warm, not cold, just still, as if the building has been sealed off from the sky. The light from their flashlights stretches thin across the hallways, their beams fading faster than they should, swallowed by a haze that doesn't look like dust. Some say the deeper you go, the more it feels like the light itself is tiring, as though it knows something you don't. But something wasn't right. It happens the same way for everyone. Not at the chapel door, not in the nave, not even as they pass the crypt's outer gate. It begins when they reach the iron stair, a narrow spiral descent, rusted through in patches, its railing slick with condensation, every light source, flashlights, headlamps, even the faint glow of phone screens, starts to fade as they approach the first step, not all at once. Slowly, like a wick drowning in its own wax. The harder they try to coax the light back, new batteries, fresh bulbs, restarted devices. The dimmer it gets, until they're left with nothing but the sound of their own breath in the darksome. Turn back immediately. Others descend anyway, gripping the cold railing, feeling for each step with their feet, counting aloud to keep their bearings. The recordings, when they survive, capture the same small sounds. Boots tapping against the iron breath, catching in the throat, the faint, hollow echo of something dripping far below. And then, the ground stone beneath their feet, the chamber at the bottom of the stair. There is no furniture left, no markings, only a ring of unlit candles, their wax pooled and hardened as if they have been burned before. Though none of them carry a wick long enough to hold flame again, the explorers always describe the same detail. The candles are warm to the touch, not hot, not freshly melted, just warm enough to feel as though someone has been there moments before. Even when the chamber air bites cold, and that's when he heard out a voice faint lower than a whisper, low enough that it feels closer to the bones than the ear. It doesn't speak a name, it doesn't cry out, it just asks another prayer, not loudly, not in a language anyone can place. But every person who's made it that far swears they understand the request, not because they know the words, but because the meaning presses against their thoughts. As the voice moves through the chamber, one explorer described it as feeling the question inside your ribs, like your own lungs were waiting to answer. No one stays long enough to reply. Some run before they reach the stair again, scraping their palms along the wet railing, not daring to look behind them. Others climb in silence, counting the steps, with shaking voices, praying the light will return before they reach the top. It always does, but only once the stair is behind them. The flashlights snap back, the phone screens glow again, all without a touch to their controls. And as they turn to look down the stairwell to see if anything followed, they swear the air feels heavier, as though something below is still drawing breath. The recordings never last, those that make it past the chamber to the surface glitch, or degrade within days. Even when copied and stored separately, the audio clips distort into low, arrhythmic pulses, the faint outline of a human inhale woven between each beat. The video, no matter how carefully preserved, always cuts before the final moments, the image blurring as the iron stair fades into darkness. Yet the explorers agree on one final, unshakable detail, not about the candles, not about the fading lights, not even about the voice. It's the feeling they carry back, a quiet that doesn't feel empty, a sense that every breath they take after leaving is being counted, somewhere deep beneath the soil, matched against something older, slower, patient. And sometimes, when the night is still and the air doesn't move, they can feel it again, a faint warmth on their hands, like the wax of a candle that has only just gone out, always just enough to remind them that the chamber hasn't stopped asking. And when the last candle goes out for good, it will not be asking anymore. If every candle goes out, what waits in the dark? And if the church buried it, how many more chambers hum beneath the soil, waiting for someone to open the door?